So let's begin, and hopefully a few more people join us kind of along the way. So hello and a big welcome. My name is Savhannah Schulz, and I'm a researcher at the Pedagogy of Play Research Group, and also a place called the Interacting Mind Center, which is this interdisciplinary research group at Aarhus University in Denmark that is kind of a short distance from where the conference is held in Billund. And at Pedagogy of Play and the Interacting Mind Center, I investigate playful learning and especially try to understand the role of reflection to support learning meaningfully for students in the classroom. And I'm really, really thrilled to be here and to connect with you today. And I have the honor to share a bit of the exciting research knowledge that exists around playful learning and kind of play as a literature in the academic world. So let's see if the slides work. So actually, I want to get this workshop started by talking for a moment about how to use this workshop. So when designing it, I found myself really pondering about how to give you a broad overview of the literature that exists in the kind of more academic field, but not overwhelming you too much by doing that. So I landed on the idea of an introductory guide that allows you to explore further. So in this, I want to offer you kind of an overview or path, if you're matching your little figure on the slide, that kind of creates some ideas for you, and you get an idea of where you want to go further and explore with play. And I want to provide you then with resources that can help you anchor and build your own knowledge further, in order to be able to be maybe more intentional in your own practice, but also to help you educate and advocate for playful learning with peers, parents, and school leaders. So at the end of this workshop, you will find some additional slides that have books, talks, and other resources on them that can kind of allow you to dig deeper into what I'm talking about today. So I will share a link in this kind of chat at the end, so you can just download those slides for yourself and then explore kind of at your own time, or look back at them if you want to and share that with your colleagues. But let's jump in. Sorry, I'm just kind of clicking through the slides here, also my other laptop, so I can see my notes. So the main question that we will ponder together over today is, what is play? But also linked to that, since we're in an educational space, all of us, we're really wondering about how does it support learning? So it's not just play as a behavior, but play as a way to support learning. And before I share a bit about my thinking on that topic, I would actually like to pause for a moment and allow you to kind of surface your intuitive understanding of that. So please take a moment and note down your own definition of play and how you think it supports learning. And I just give you a minute or two to take that down and note it down for yourself. Importantly, there's no right and wrong answers here. I'd just like to really kind of surface your intuitive understandings so we can return to them later. So if you feel comfortable, feel invited to share also your responses in the chat so we can look at each other's ideas around play. And this way I can also draw on your responses and share a few when we go forward into the slides. If you are a second language speaker like myself, you might feel comfortable actually taking down your notes in your own language. So if you, for example, speak Spanish, Mandarin, feel comfortable with writing it in your own language. That might be easier for you to do that. So I'll just give you for a few moments and I'll remind you at the end of the time so you have a bit of time to wrap up. I'll give you just a few more minutes to kind of wrap up your thinking and maybe put your answer in the chat, but I'm already seeing a lot of really interesting ideas surfacing in the chat. So if you just have a look at that, if you're waiting for us to continue. So just to share some ideas that are emerging in the chat, really interesting. So Andreas says that to me, play supports learning by helping those who play to apply what they're learning in context, but also to develop some of those habits of mind and approaches to problem that make a person excited about learning and countering challenges. And then someone anonymously kind of explores similar realms and says play is exploring new connections with people, ideas, being responsive to discovery. And then I'm also seeing Carlos here who says, for me, play is a joyful strategy that involves creativity and imagination. And if you scroll through the chat, you can actually see some wonderful additionals. So I'm just scrolling down a bit to get some other ideas involved. And so Minyu has I'm just noticing that I've been somehow my mic was muted. I hope you could hear me. So I was just reading out a response from Minyu, who said that play is something that challenges us in a joyful way and something I wish to continue and revisit. And apologies if you kind of missed out for a second here. And there's so many more wonderful examples of what people feel like play is. But now I would like to continue, and please make sure that you keep your definition and your ideas close to you. We will return to them later on. So hold on to them. If you have a notebook, make sure you know on which page it is. But now I would actually like to turn to some of the ideas and things that I know about. So I would like to talk about play as a behavior, but also play as a mindset. So that's kind of two ideas that exist around play, playful learning. But let's jump into play as a behavior. So play is first and foremost, I think, in the literature on evolutionary theories and in kind of academic theories on psychology as a universal behavior that can be observed in humans and certain highly intelligent animals. And we're talking mostly here about social and warm-blooded animals here. So recently we discovered that bees can actually play as well. And so think, for instance, of young monkeys who dangle high up in the treetops. So in the Congo Basin, there is bonobo monkeys who do this a lot. There's also lion cubs engaging in play fighting in the afternoon heat of the savannah, but also consider human children. So it's been raining on and off in Denmark, and we see children jumping into puddles and enjoying themselves, playing along. And all of these instances of play behavior are internally motivated, and they do not have to be taught. So there's no outside source that asks people to do this. It comes from within, especially when we see it in animals. So they are intrinsic and are most often noted in the kind of earlier phases of a species' lifespan. In other words, we most often see play in young animals. And from an evolutionary perspective, this is super intriguing, and it presents this especially intriguing behavior as it results in the expending of quite a lot of energy. So you burn a lot of energy when you're running around and jumping through the treetops. But it doesn't serve any function for survival or reproduction, which are kind of the core elements of the evolutionary theory, that everything we do is either to reproduce or for surviving within the kind of our surroundings. And animals that play require more food. So if we play a lot outside, you might know this from the kindergarten or from your own life, we need more food to sustain ourselves. And often when we play, we risk serious injury in the play process. So if you think about those bonobo monkeys having in the treetops, they might risk falling to the ground and seriously injuring themselves. And accordingly, for evolutionary theories, play presents this luxury behavior that is somehow still prioritized over important survival behaviors such as gathering food. And so despite this apparent lack of purpose, most biologists actually assume that play, this high energy, high risk behavior, must serve some crucial function for us in the evolutionary context. So if not, it is really hard to explain why so many intelligent species have developed play as part of their behavioral repertoire. So playful animals, such as these cute bear cubs fighting, tend to mature more slowly. So we need a longer time to reach maturity. So that is bears, humans, dolphins, many species that play actually take a long time to be self-sufficient. And playful animals also have larger brains and good learning abilities. So they're able to pick up more learning than animals that don't play. And it seems apparent from this that playful behavior must be linked in some way to learning. So play and behavior are inherently linked in some form. And in fact, many researchers exactly believe that, so that while the value of play is not always immediately visible to us, play enables humans and other animals to learn and master routines that will be important in their later lives. So there's this idea that animals play to practice for something in the future. So for example, play in the literature has been shown to aid in the practice of complex movements. It can help develop our muscles and provide a setting to improve physical balance. It can also assist in the acquisition of communication skills. That is verbal ones, so as us humans speaking, but also non-verbal kind of techniques of communicating with each other, such as rats communicating. And enables the construction of working knowledge of the environment. And by putting this into kind of an educational context, think of these two girls, which are actually from an Anji kindergarten. So if you listened to Ms. Cheng's presentation yesterday, you might have seen these before. And they're engaged in kind of a balancing act on a barrel on their playground when I visited them in 2018. And these children learn to develop their balance and muscles through this activity on their playground, but they're also really learning a lot of social skills through the interaction. And in Anji, they look back at these kind of playground activities through documentation of their teachers and actually discuss what happened here. What do I learn about the physics of movement that is happening? So in this, play can present a way for us to train also for unexpected situations. So a game amongst children that involves jumping on one leg, so which is known as hopscotch in many cultures, could really prepare us for a scenario where we might need to be able to balance on one leg in the future. So if you get injured, that might really help you to know how to shift your balance. And so far we've been talking about play as this animal behavior. But there's this way in which human play which differs from other animals. So it includes this pretense or pretend play. And as far as we know, among all the animals that we have documented that are playing, humans seems to be the only ones who not only engage in play fighting, rough and tumble play, which could also be considered a form of pretense in some way, but they also display a vast range of pretend play behaviors beyond this. So if you're thinking about these two kids on the screen who are playing astronaut, who are traveling to the sun. And in fact, pretend play in a form of play that once children enter the later kind of kindergarten years is really quite of the dominant version of play. And pretend play allows children to explore different worlds and play with symbolic understandings. So tinkering with them and kind of testing their grounds by playing banana with a phone, for example. And importantly, pretend play provides a way for learners to perform counterfactual thinking, what if thinking, the ability to distinguish reality from kind of an imagined alternative and try out possible imagined hypotheses about the world. And that offers more learning scenarios than any elaborate classroom could really do. So if I'm imagining I'm traveling to the moon in my mind, I can go beyond the walls of this classroom that I'm in, for example. And by continuously asking what if, it also allows children of all ages to take different perspectives and build socio-emotional skills by taking on different roles and identities in their play. So by playing mother, I can understand family dynamics differently than if I'm the baby or a different person of the family. And when we grow older, we still pretend play, but it kind of transitions and transforms. So we still use our imagination a lot to transport us into new worlds. So in a game of Dungeons and Dragons that many of my friends play, they become grumpy trolls, or when we write stories and books and movies and create movies, we really share our worlds with each other and make them visible. So on this slide, you can actually see an example from the classroom. And these are two children from POP's South Africa work. And they draw on their imagination to pretend that they are scientists who just discovered a new species. And Tadishwa, who's the girl on the right, has envisioned the tick-tock, this wonderful animal that you can now see as her drawing, which is a really extraordinary animal that lives in the South Pacific Ocean. And she got out the globe to really understand where that is. And it feeds on sand, prawns, and baby fish. It has killer shark teeth and needs 12 hours of time on land and 12 hours in the sea. So pretend play allows children to put forward arbitrary and imagined goals as well, driven by their own curiosity. So I can make up future events in kind of directions I want to go to. And this leads to child-led learning based on curiosity and interest, rather than this kind of external setting of goals that we see in guided play that comes from a teacher, a parent, or other kind of peer. So it leads to choice, wonder, and delight, and we will turn to those words in a minute. But there's ample further examples and studies from classroom pointing into the learnings of benefit of playful learning. And if you go into the slide section, you see some books that I've recommended where you can have like an accessible introduction into ideas around play and kind of the literature there. But right now, I would like to invite you to use your own imagination and grab some objects in your view just around yourself. Don't worry about what it is. So I have a water bottle available. I'll use that. And ask yourself, what if that object that you just chose, or like you have some time to also choose a new one. What if this object was a musical instrument? I might need to actually have a bow to play with this instrument. So I'll just look around what I have a whole music room available. So there's some clay tools that are someone left behind for me. And for the next kind of 2 minutes, I'll invite you to look at your object and wonder what rhythm and sounds can it produce. Can I shake it? Can I play it with another instrument? I might have fun with this one. And if you're in a group, can you combine objects to form a band? So how do your instruments play together? And just in 2 minutes, I give you kind of some time to explore, and I'll continue playing myself in the meanwhile as well. So I'll give you a few more moments to play, and I'm already imagining how kind of soundscapey it could be right now. And while you're kind of winding down your play, just to note that I might not be able to see your incredible questions that you're already asking right now, but I'll return to them at the end if I can. And if not, I'll just respond to them in the chat. You can also reach out to me via email if you want to kind of discuss your ideas further. So kind of this play was based on an experience, an exercise that was developed by Michael Rosen, who has a book full of ideas of how you can kind of get yourself in a playful mindset in a normal day. So check that out if you're interested. Now I'd actually like to kind of stay away from that moment, even though I'm really enjoying kind of holding on to the idea of musical instruments across the world sounding right now. And take a moment to look back at our exploration so far in kind of thinking about the instance we just did this experience. And I would like to ask you, like, was it sufficiently answering what you felt like was play? What was missing of the playful ideas that we just had? And there's also this question of, did this make you feel playful? And it's completely normal if you don't, because what feels playful for one doesn't feel playful for all. So for me, this really felt playful, but for others that might have not. I have a very kind of same-aged brother who almost always doesn't enjoy the same playfulness experiences that I do. So we talked about behavior so far, but there's this element missing, I would argue, and that is the experience of being playful. And many of you actually describe this in your experiences. Being creative, imaginative, feeling joy is an experience that we have that is not necessarily captured completely when we describe play and its behavior. So kind of playfulness as a mindset to approach things. And we already saw that also in our panel earlier, where there was a lot of ideas around how practitioners from all kind of from a chemist to a cartoon artist use their play and being creative. So in research, we actually come often across these concepts that we're unable to directly observe or measure. So if you think about playfulness and the experience we just had, although we all have an intuitive grasp of what it kind of feels like to be playful, it means to be playful and to experience it. It's really hard to necessarily observe it from the outside perspective. So if we're looking for playfulness in the classroom as a teacher as well, it can be hard to capture that. And it's this intangible concept. So we can either infer playfulness in relating it to other phenomena and experience, so behaviors that we can observe, so that are present during playful experiences. So if you kind of bird's eye viewed on me in this experience, I was focusing very sternly, I was laughing. So if you think about yourself and kind of taking this bird's eye view on how you just explored, like what would you have noticed? And alternatively, I could have also asked you guys if you felt playful, if it was joyful for you. How did you experience this? So the other option we always have is asking people the individual subjective experience, but it might not translate to another person. So what feels playful for one then doesn't kind of feel playful for another. So this is this really interesting thing about mindsets, that they are inaccessible from a descriptive level. So in research, we often try to describe what we're noticing, but here we really need to understand the internal mechanisms of something. And so in research, playfulness is actually a really badly defined concept. So when research tries to capture playfulness, we often refer to it as an attitude, a mode, or mental stance that can be modulated independent of the activity pursued. And I saw this kind of similar wording from many of you who describe what play is for them and playful learning. And often playfulness in its use is linked to creativity. And I saw the question of how it's linked to creativity. Many people use creativity and playfulness interchangeably. And that is actually a huge issue because we haven't gotten really a demarcation between those two. There's also others that have used this concept of play as a mood, kind of a feeling. And that is my colleague Helle Marie Skobjerg, who's based in Denmark as well. And she says that a play mood is a state of being in which we're open and ready, both to others and their production of meaning and to new opportunities for producing meaning. So consider, for instance, if you're walking across a cobblestone pavement that I'm doing every day on my way to work. You can choose to just walk along, paying no much attention to your surroundings, focusing on kind of your day ahead. Or if you put yourself in a playful mindset and treat it as a game, as like the walk game to work, you might actually create some rules and some ideas to take that walk differently. So maybe if I walk to work, I'm a chess piece and I can only work diagonally, or I can jump 2 states and then I have to go right or left. There's so many rows. Maybe I have to skip actually at every second one. It's all up to you to create those intrinsic motivations to guide you. So, and to illustrate what a difference that could actually make, I would like you to share a little experiment that my colleague Katrin Heimann did at Aarhus University that I worked on years ago. So Katrin, this is the wonderful lady on the left, and my colleague Andreas Röpsdorf as well, asked people to come into a room at the university. And there we invited them in and said, we will give you 5 Lego ducks, so the one like on the screen, and kind of loose pieces. They weren't assembled yet. And we asked the people to build 5 ducks, and we gave them the following instructions. So I would like you to build 5 ducks. They could look like this duck, and the kind of, we're pointing at a prototype duck, but you could also look at the one on the screen, or any other duck-like creature that you can imagine. And the only thing that really matters to us is that you do this in a playful way. So participants build as long as they needed. And after the building process finished, Katrin actually looked back with them at this experience, and using an interview technique that really focused on describing your internal kind of sensations, feelings, and experiences, she tried to kind of dig deeper and uncover what people were doing. And you can see some examples of how a duck-like creature could look like. So people in this interview described the experience as joyful. They record a lot of childhood memories of connecting with friends over playful experiences. And they shared stories behind the builds they had created. So if you look at the duck on the kind of right on the middle, people were saying it's a Superman duck that is rescuing and flying other ducks. Or there was a duck eating and nibbling on a brick as well. And in the same experiment, we actually didn't just ask people to look and build playful ducks, but we also asked them to build 5 ducks in a way that really felt like work to them. And instead of seeing this giggling participants who are joyfully building away, completely lost track of time, people in this condition who are asked to build in a workful manner, they build assembly lines, creating time pressure for themselves. So saying, oh, I had to get it done as quickly as possible. Some even implied that we said that to them, even though we didn't. We gave them the exact same instructions as before. And many of them looked very stressful and stern-faced during this experience. And interestingly, most of our participants, when we asked them afterwards, said, I actually don't work in a factory. I don't work in an environment where that is my work. I'm an architect. I'm a creative person who thinks about their work actually quite positively. So it was really interesting for us to see that just by asking people to approach tasks differently, we had completely different outcomes, but also completely different experience. So joy versus stress. And as researchers, we often don't stop there. So that was really interesting, I think, to see this shift in perspective. But Katrin actually analyzed the data from all the interviews, and she somehow noticed a pattern through that process that kind of always went the same way when people actually were able to get themselves in a playful mindset. It started with this feeling of autonomy and of, okay, let's be creative. So they freed themselves from the constraints of the task even. So some decided to not build a duck at all, but actually step away from it and build something completely different. And the next step, they kind of let go of the process and the bricks took over. People forgot about time and they enjoyed the haptic experience of clicking things together. That was really joyful for them, this kind of clicking sound. If you've ever played with Lego, you might remember it. And when looking back at their finished ducks, because they kind of let go of what was happening, they were really surprised and described a lot of confidence and competence at how they kind of experienced it. So, wow, I did this. I didn't see that coming. And this was actually a loop that continued. So people had an experience of competence that led to more autonomy and led to kind of an iterative process of feeling playful. It's a repeating loop. And of course, that loop can break. So steps can get interrupted, and feeling internal pressure to do something well can actually break that. So as soon as we lose this feeling of autonomy, maybe we're in a workshop and we're trying to be really creative and showing everyone else how creative we can be. That can hinder any feeling of freedom to explore. Constructions can also fail in the process of building. So I might want to build a car, but it doesn't really hold together and keeps on falling apart. So this frustration can also let me lose this feeling of playfulness. And that's actually where educators are really important to help connect the loop again and help us going further and further. So how can we utilize, you might wonder, this research to integrate it into play in education, since this is kind of an academic discussion about the topic? How would we embed playfulness into the classroom from this? So we clearly need some translational work, some language that allows us to transfer this into practice. So let's start with what we talked about today. So we know from our own experience and that of others what play and playfulness feels like. So if you're thinking about yourself, you might remember what play is for you. And then we also have some available knowledge about what play behavior looks like from the outside. There's actually some really nice models that show kind of what play behaviors can be. And we also know this from the classroom describing it ourselves. But what we're missing from this kind of feels like and looks like from the outside is that play is always embedded in a cultural context. Play can differ between countries. Some of you might be from the eastern part, because you're in a different time zone than maybe someone who's in the evening right now in Denmark. And how you play and what you play with might be very different depending on your cultural context. And so play is also between learning communities within the school. So to illustrate this really quickly, it's often helpful to look at language. So in Danish, we have this word leg and spil available to describe play. So instead of just having play, we have two versions of play that we can communicate about. And that actually creates spaces for us to talk about play differently than in English. So leg is more free play. So if I say I lie with my friends, I'm free playing. I don't have structure or guided rules. But if I spil, I'm engaging in more structured play. I'm guided in the process often by a game or by an outside person. So I would argue actually that what we need is indicators of playful learning that are grounded within our local context. And that is something the Pedagogy of Play group and the International School of Berlin that this wonderful conference is hosted as have done together. They have developed their local language around what playful learning means to them. And instead of having play as this abstract concept that you might mean different things by, you have very specific things you can look for in your classroom and ask students about, and that you can kind of tinker with also in your practice. So for a moment, I just want to give you kind of a minute to look across the indicators and see, is there anything that surprises you of the wonder, choice, and delight indicators that they came to? And so you might wonder, what can I do with these indicators? And if you're interested in developing your own, or if you want to learn more about the process, you can look on the Pedagogy of Play website that are linked at the end of the slide. So you can kind of look at the documentation of this process, but also see a guide that helps you develop your own. So I would argue you can actually use this model to say, I want to identify an experience in which you would like to support playful learning. That might be a particular class, a theme, a unit of learning, or something completely different. Maybe a staff meeting, a team meeting that you want to tinker with. And then as a second step, you want to consider how you can structure the experience to encourage choice, wonder, and delight, or use your own indicators that you think define for you playful learning. And that can help you, because introducing play into the classroom might be feeling very kind of constrained, but if you say, I want to play with the choice that I give my students, I want to offer them options of how they learn, how they share their learning with me. So you want to offer them different ways, different products that they can share their thinking with you. You might offer them ways to work individually, or they can work as a team depending on what feels right to them. And now leave us kind of here and return for the last few seconds to this idea of that we started with. So what is play and how does it support learning? And you had some incredible thinking there already, and I can see more have kind of shown up in the chat while I've been talking. And I would like to help us return to what we started with in the beginning, with a thinking routine that's been developed by Project Zero called I Used to Think, Now I Think. So when we began the workshop today, you had this initial ideas. So I would like you to think about, what did you used to think in a sentence or two max, writing that down. And then think about the ideas that have changed as a result of what we've been looking at together today. Maybe nothing has changed actually. And in just a few sentences, write down what you think about playful learning. Start your sentences with now I think. So just try to kind of keep it to one sentence. And as earlier, if you feel comfortable, share your responses in the chat. It will be really wonderful to see your thinking for us as a group. And I would be intrigued to see if something changed for you, if you have new ideas that you want to continue exploring. Wonderful. There's so many interesting responses appearing in the chat, so please feel invited to look across what other people have thought. There's also a lot of kind of puzzles and questions people have been raising. So there's been a continuous debate since Piaget about the difference between guided and free play. I haven't touched upon this today, but of course there's answers to this. So please stay tuned tomorrow for the panel. And Ben has a little surprise, I think, for all of us that might really get to the answer to that. So just reading out one here, plays individual. Now I think playful learning is individual, customized, and personal. Now I think in learning context, play can be a tool for the children to practice a concept that they learned, connecting their learning to the world. I now think that play can be a state of mind, and there's so much scope to bring that into everyday life. It's really interesting, and please continue to explore what playful learning means to you and what the world already has to offer. I see there's other people in the chat who have been doing thinking on this as well. This conference is full of people who have really kind of thought about how to bring playful learning into practices, and stay tuned tomorrow to kind of learn more from them. So I would like to end this workshop. Whoop. And of course the slides play with me as well. You can find, for those asked, my slides on the screen, and I'll quickly share them, the link in the chat as well. So if you go to my website, there's a talks and workshop button. So if you click on that, you can download the slides. And just to give you kind of a peek quickly, what is play and how does it support learning? And here you can kind of see Pedagogy of Play resources. I've linked a book by my colleague Mark Anderson, who has done some incredible work on capturing what play is in the theory in a really accessible way. And there's some other books as well to help you kind of guide this, research papers, some blog posts. So please engage kind of if you're interested, but don't feel pressured to do so, of course. So going back, thank you for joining the workshop. It has been such a great way, and please reach out if you have any question that I couldn't get to. Thank you.